Yeah, I'm just gonna talk about like the context of the show. It's like it starts from my own personal worldview of like the world as a video game. It's like it's like a LARP. Like I see the world or existence as a kind of LARP. So it's like today I can play this character and make these kind of works, but then maybe in a month or two I'm gonna be radically transformed. Like that's what I aspire to become. So for this exhibition, I kind of created like a Pokemon game where you control the player on in like a top-down view, like isometric, and then you're encountering different objects and figures inside this kind of simulated game. But here I'm using sort of like physical objects to create a simulated environment. Mm-hmm. So it's like a physical kind of way to create the sense of like simulation and artificiality and fakeness. Mm-hmm. So yeah, I mean, like this is like a figure that I made. Like I'm kind of like exploring ways to create a body, without actually using a lot of material. Mm-hmm. So here it's like I'm using like fabric.
It's like 3 objects.
Yeah, it's like completely. It's kind of like minimal, but at the same time, it kind of generates the presence of the figure. Mm-hmm. With like the volume that the fabric generates, mm-hmm. and also using like bicycle helmet as a face, or mm-hmm. kind of exploring like potentials of the ready-made object and how the object can transform itself under different combinations with other objects.
It's really like computational. Like right when you walk in, it's the first thing you run into.
Yeah, totally.
And it has a really daunting presence too.
Totally. And it's like a haunting ghost figure.
Mm-hmm. I could call back to like the screen, pumpkin face kind of thing, with the helmet.
And also like with the anime gloves, it kind of adds on to, like it adds a layer of like potential violence.
Yeah, the threatening as well.
About to exert on the viewer.
Yeah.
And that kind of forms like the hands. It creates like limbs through the anime gloves.
Just by being placed there?
Yeah. So yeah, it's like a super
an effortless gesture.
Effortless, figurative kind of approach.
But they have a lot of presence though. Like
Yeah,
with
so
minimal,
that's
with like minimal effort.
That's like
maintain this presence.
It basically is a body of like air. You know, it's like it's super hollow.
I'm thinking about what you said about video game environments too. About like this background sort of being. Did you spray these or are they printed?
These are Chinese ink.
Okay.
Straight out from the ink bottle.
Okay.
On curve.
Okay. They look like just like copy pasted though. Like there's no variation really.
Yeah.
They're just kind of like continuous background.
Yeah. It's like a repetitive.
Yeah. It calls back to that like kind of video game environment.
Oh, like repeating like polygon models. You know, like
yeah, exactly.
Polygon models.
Which goes back to like animation, back with like Hanna-Barbera, just like repeating background.
Oh yeah.
It goes like on repeat.
Yeah, interesting. That's something I didn't think of when I was like working on the curves.
So you obviously have like an intended path for viewers to follow. Or are there other forks that you can kind of like choose your own journey?
Basically, it's a super kind of imposed journey. It's like a fixed route. So I have like these panel works. Maybe we can like look at this one.
They read. I mean, the way they're placed in space really like symmetrically and very intentional. They read like advertisements almost.
Especially
with the text. But I don't know what's being sold to me, of course.
I guess like I was interested in the idea of like capitalism and like spirituality under the context of like accelerated capitalism, say like Taobao or like Alibaba.
Yeah. Which you purchase most of these objects and materials from.
Yeah. And also like even on a daily basis or like a personal level, like it kind of like controls my entire lifestyle or like my objects at home even. So it was logical to kind of incorporate those objects and the whole kind of online shopping, like in my personal life, into the exhibition. So like for this panel, it's like I'm exploring, like I'm using like found images of like ready-made objects. So there's this appropriation of ready-made objects as well as the images of those objects to kind of create like a maximalist kind of visual quality. And here it's this refers to Himalayan salt, where they kind of use it to make lamps, and they sell it to people saying that it's like purified.
It's healthier.
Yeah, it's like
than
healthy
regular salt.
It's like a healthy
It's
it's like a healthy furniture piece where you put on your table, and then it releases ions to kind of purify the air. But nobody really know if it's legit, right?
It just looks nice though.
But then people kind of they impose this like it's like fetishized, and people are like believing into the kind of spiritual qualities of these objects within accelerated capitalism.
Decapitation scene.
I think another kind of consistent trope throughout like the exhibition is like the use of masks, and especially like latex masks to create the head or like the face for figures. And then here I'm staging like a decapitation scene, and using different kind of objects, it creates a certain narrative that can be linked with like other pieces on site. So at the back, you can actually see like the band, a patch of the band decapitated. And then this kind of references like the piece over there where after this piece, it got its head cut off, its head kind of placed inside the joy box. And then like the soul leaves the head, and then in the progress kind of releases energy, or it releases and manifests it in like different kind of form. And in the progress, and it
Just something about characters.
Characters.
You like analyze any of these? So I'm thinking about masks.
Yeah.
Someone else. Schizoanalysis thing.
Yeah. Like speaking of like LARPing, right? I guess like these objects are kind of manifestations of my own kind of psyche, but at the same time they're like externalized like manifestations of myself.
Yeah.
So I do find a certain connection with these objects, and I'm also like employing different kind of psychic modes when I make these objects. It's like I imagine I'm a caveman, or like I imagine myself as a scientist, or like there's these different kind of roles that you play inside your head. I mean, maybe like when you make art, you also kind of imagine yourself as some kind of persona, and then you make art.
Anachronistic about it too, like this various throwbacks to being a caveman, but also being a scientist at the same time.
Yeah.
But also not like feeling like you belong here all the time.
It's like you time travel, and then you kind of create these different contexts for yourself to make work in, and in some way that kind of begins to kind of create a logic within the work instead of
Instead of actually belonging to something else.
Yeah, instead of like just belonging
right
to
up-
the immediate context.
Right off the bat, and also like knowing your work, there's like various throwbacks to these like anachronistic ideas from different times, like primitive shamanism, and then like tribal art, which is completely been already bastardized and
Yeah.
reused. So taking that from our own low culture and then combining it with like Slipknot, Hot Topic aesthetic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In a way, I mean, speaking of like time traveling and what you just mentioned earlier, it's like there's this romanticization of like primitive life now, especially with like anarcho, like anthem.
Yeah.
But obviously, it's like it's kind of impossible to kind of achieve because you're so accustomed to like modern life, right? Yes, but I'm incredibly attracted to the kind of freedom or like the anarchistic nature of primitive living, and these kind of manifest itself as like these paintings here.
These trash bag vines with poppy flowers and opium plants are the curious though. Like they run through the entire exhibition.
They do. These are.
I'm just like, what do you feel is their role in the show? Is it some kind of like relief?
It's kind of like a large-scale installation in itself, but then it's also a pragmatic existence. Like these are like fluid lamps. So in a way, the pragmatics of the exhibition becomes a part of the exhibition itself by transcending material. So it's like with additional material, it transcends itself as a pragmatic kind of item into an installation itself. And I'm also trying to create like some sort of like forest or like a nature-esque visual language to kind of like simulate a forest or like simulate nature, but at the same time, the textures.
It's so blatantly artificial.
Yeah, it's like everything is completely plastic.
But it's opium, which like when you synthesize it enough and do enough things to it.
Yeah, that's like
medicine.
It's like drugs, right? But people think drugs are like this artificial substance or like this man-made substance.
This
but
shit
then,
comes from the earth though.
yeah, but then everything has its origin on Earth. So in a way, like nothing is really artificial. Like everything is like derived from like nature, even like plastic.
Right. Sure. This is wild though. Medicinal mushrooms and crystals.
Tylur's Tower.
What's that?
That's like a Russian constructivist,
Oh
or like a Russian avant-garde utopian structure, which was never built obviously, like all utopian kind of proposals. But here it's like a sinking structure, kind of like depicting the decay or like the decomposition or like the deaths in the process of creating utopia.
Yeah.
So it's always this tension between death and also like progress.
Yeah.
And then again, there's like motifs of like nature.
Decomposition is another form of growth in itself.
So it's like sinking into a pool of blood and skulls and bodies. You can see on the side here.
You've lined a lot of the windows.
Yeah.
Death figures, angelic figures, cherubs.
A lot of like the capitation, I guess like a soft reference to like the whole Thai kind of lineage of transcending the body and transcending the soul.
A lot of like occultish stuff.
But
decapitation.
I'm like offsetting these like graphic or like violin imageries with like Western established religion icons with like angels.
Winged angels.
So this is kind of like a balance between the hypergraphic or like the hyper-violin with kind of religious undertone. And also, it's like done in a very juvenile style.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. Like, it's like a naivety to it.
Yeah. So it's kind of like the
Outsider
offset.
art kind of thing.
It's kind of like offset the graphic nature of the works.
Jesus, get my these apples.
Sponsoring.
Just the bird and elves.
Yeah, so like this is like an earlier work that I made. Again, it's like similar to like helmets, where when you look at the pelvis from this angle, it becomes like head, face. It's very like tribal-ish, like tribal animism and tribal like fetishization of like objects is how objects can transcend their original state.
I think for me the most jarring thing with the work is like, and also just knowing you, it's this desire to create something sacred.
Yeah.
But like, if I didn't know you though, I wouldn't be so sure like how sincere it is. You know what I mean? Especially with like the sources that you take from the images and the objects that you're playing with. And there's something very like totem-like about it, shamanistic.
I guess I wouldn't say it's like insincere, but I think it relates a lot to child's play or like how children play with toys. So it's not like they are ironic about it, but then it's like they create something childish or something naive from the process, and I'm attracted to like these qualities, and it also relates to like my own process of like a lot of play with like objects. It's like toys. I see sculpture as like a playing kind of like a process focus, a lot on play, experimentation. And like this is like a blast of a tri-spoon. So going back to like the caveman kind of lineage. But I've also like introduced like stuff like ear stretching.
Yeah.
It's like a small comment on like global capitalism and how that kind of flattens culture. It's like because it has its origin in like Africa, right? Like ear stretching, and back in Africa, it's like it has this hugely sacred kind of tradition in like body modification. It's like a rite of passage. But then when it's appropriated by like heavy metal bands or like hardcore bands, it becomes a purely aesthetic kind of aesthetic thing instead of having
Interesting how you merge that with the traditional like Chinese.
Acupuncture.
Acupunctural like mapping of an ear.
Yeah. That goes back to the acceleration of like material and objects online. So there's a lot of it's like a schizophrenic assemblage of stuff.
And now workers are getting involved.
Yeah. So
like we had like some kind of like totem priest shaman figures and now guys in jumpsuits.
So it's like actively removing the artificial grass to kind of reveal the gallery texture. So it's like a reminder that everything's kind of it's kind of just like there's a fakeness to it, and it's like revealing.
It's also just like
revealing reality.
Yeah. It's also just like a funny like knock at just like I don't know, being an artist, working in the gallery, being like an art handler.
Oh yeah.
Some experiences of doing that, like when you go into an art gallery, you see all these like beautiful objects being placed, but there's just like so much labor.
The process is not really pretty.
Yeah, and a lot of us as like young artists are familiar with that, especially because most of us have to make a living, and we don't make art for a living. We move it for a living usually, or something related.
Yeah, it's like bringing art back down into a labor kind of perspective. It's like art labor is still hard labor, you know. But it's not something on a pedestal.
Mm-hmm.
It's very realistic.
Yeah.
Like it's very material.
Yeah, it's material.
You know, it's like there's a lot of labor intensive procedures.
Really violent room. Limbs, spinal column freaked out. And then more like art gallery jokes.
Where
I immediately see this as a viewer in an art gallery, just like contemplating a work.
oh
But they're stuck there forever, of course, because he put them there. They're wearing a mask.
yeah, that's interesting that you said it looks like someone contemplating. This is like one of my imagined like ego, like imagined self. I don't know, it might sound kind of goofy to like imagine yourself as some kind of like Chinese literati. I mean, like it's like when I look back at my own kind of history, right? Because in like a post kind of cultural revolution era, like my history is kind of oblivious to myself. It's like I don't know where I came from, or like there's this huge disconnect with one's like heritage. So I'm like imagining myself as like a traditional Chinese cultured person
Imagine
making art.
Growing up in Hong Kong must really complicate those feelings too.
I think Hong Kong it's extremely complicated because it's dominated by economic growth and also having to survive in extreme kind of environments, or like having to compete with a lot of people. Hong Kong in a way it's extremely nihilistic.
Yeah.
It's like nothing means anything except for generating profits or like money. It's like super money oriented. So there's no longer any kind of meaning left.
You mentioned like the architecture, feeling that as well, like just the way people live, like the homes, like living in a flat in a mega residential building. Also kind of feels that.
It's like a spatial kind of displacement from the ground because
Yeah.
normally people live on the ground and you have
In your family's home, right?
in a home, like a home, and then it should sit on a piece of land that you might own. So there's this connection with like the earth itself through the land. Then now everybody in Hong Kong is like displaced
A lot of displacement.
in midair. So there's
It's
like
really
no
messy rooms. Like
so there's no roots or like there's no connection with the earth itself. So this piece, it's like a mutilated kind of, it's like a mutilated version of like the person at the back. So it's like the person in the horse latex suit got mutilated, and during the process he releases the energy, and then the energy is trapped inside the bird cage. A small kind of perversion, a small tint of perversion in like these My Little Pony figures, and kind of in a way kind of like patriarchal, unintentional, with like the horse dildo in the center. But then it's also like a removal of like masculinity. It's like its dick got chopped off, so it's like so it's kind of like a destruction of like masculinity, and then you have like these little ponies just like floating.
I'm curious about the Yu-Gi-Oh cards. I mean, the cards being scattered obviously kind of comes along with this like displacement.
And like explosion
Yeah.
or destruction.
But like, why Yu-Gi-Oh cards rather than a deck of cards of like 52 cards that you use for poker?
I guess like
I mean, there's like there's a visual language I can see that
it's like
that links to the other visual
iconic
things that you're
yeah.
referencing. A lot of like 2000s pop culture, little pop culture kind of stuff.
I think the Yu-Gi-Oh card kind of I think I can relate to it because I grew up playing it, but in another sense, it's like it has its own kind of world that it builds up. It has its own kind of ontology or how things operate inside this game. So I think the card game relates back to the kind of the geist of, or like the entire exhibition, how it's kind of staged in a very video game-ish way. So there's this relation between the card game and the game of the exhibition. And also like we have Exodia here.
Yeah, I noticed one of the pieces somewhere else too.
Oh yeah.
All 5 pieces.
So that relates to like
I'm definitely gonna like touch like 3 people who like have played this like
the mutilation.
and then thought spinning right here.
So I guess like in the exhibition, I'm trying to install various details that kind of hints at where everything originates from, or like where everything comes from.
Easter eggs.
Kind of, yeah. And also to kind of make these curtains become a work in itself. So this hand is kind of like sewing, making the curtain. So this entire curtain becomes one large work with this pair of hands. In a way, it's kind of like a goofy rendition of biblical accurate angels.
Yeah,
It's
the
like,
eyes on the wings, heads of animals, like Book of Ezekiel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
because I didn't want to like make the whole thing like overly religious. So, in a way, like you can see like the animal heads is kind of like goofy kind of material gesture. For example, like the koala, the koala. It's like it's
There are no Australian headed angels in heaven.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
just too wild.
So there's a slightly like comedic,
Yeah, like a golden
Effect.
retriever headed angel.
like slightly comedic
Yeah.
touch to kind of offset the eroticism or like the deeply sacred or like deeply violent kind of visual language throughout.
These cages, though. Is that what they are? They're cages?
Yeah, they're
What are they intended for? Like, what goes inside these? These are
People. I'll have people go in, and also like
You're gonna have
cage,
people inside these?
for a performance, yeah.
Okay.
But also, it's like the cage is a metaphor for like the body. Like your body is sort of like a cage. You're like kind of trapped in your own flesh or like your own physical self, and then over there you have these transcendent beings that kind of escape the material and the physical realm. So the cages are kind of like a contrasting element.